I'm glad to be a part of the Archives Committee, and glad to be able to, as an older citizen, to be able to give some information that maybe will be of help for the generations to come. So I'm Marian Patten and my husband Kenneth, and we came in 1977, and we came I think 6 months after Harold Zirkle, our pastor, was here, and we got to know each other, and Harold asked if Ken and I would be able to help them with the youth in the church, and we said yes. We had been working with the junior highs through a lot of our service areas in the military, and so we said yes, we'd help him. And he asked us if we'd do the senior highs, and we said yes, we would. So we took the senior highs, and the Zirkles took the junior highs. This is heavy, and I'm going to put it down. And we, as I said, had so many dedicated young people in the group, and among them was Jerome Brimage. He was a natural leader, and really I could tell what a fine young man he was, and I figured he'd be something special along the line, and sure enough, I didn't realize at the time that he became a Methodist minister, and has just I don't know how soon, but he's a district superintendent now, and has really moved up in the ranks, and is such a fine leader and a wonderful young man. And another one in the group was let's see, Brenda Borchers, and I knew that she was going to be special too. As it turned out, she became a very good lawyer, and was an attorney here in New Braunfels, and had made a lot of good cases and gone on. And there are so many others. I'm going to mention a whole bunch of them. Roger and Bruce Alves were part of this group, and Mike Galloway, Carolyn Lemon, Carol Johnson, Leanne Baith, Mike Rector, John Langford. I think there were 3 Kahlers. They were, as a family, I think they had 7 Kahlers or 8 Kahlers, and 3 of them, of the top ones, were in our group at different times. And then we had Randy Lifesty and Brian and Juliet Watson, John Bruns, Johnny Hawk, Rebecca Halbert, Tracy Renfro, and Darren Post, and Lenora Post. So those are just a few of the young people that I remembered to jot down on my list. Wanted people to know that they were in the youth group, and the group were very good. They planned their own officers, and then they did their devotionals, and we worked as a group to do Bible studies and all kinds of things. And they were really a dedicated young group. We had a lot of fun doing things, and we took them at one time to a new area over in the Fisher, Texas area. A couple of ladies, one of them was a professor at Southwest Texas, and she and her friend came and bought some property there, and they wanted it to be turned into a youth group. And so we thought we got in touch with them and went out and went for a week, which was a big undertaking, and we took bedding and all kinds of things there, and we sort of camped out, and it was kind of rustic, but we enjoyed it, and they were good to get in and do dishes after our meals. They would help. They would come in from whatever areas we were working on, and different ones were assigned to go in and help get the food ready. and get it on the table and be able to carry the food back and forth from the kitchen to the tables. And then there was another group that came in, and they were going to do the cleanup afterward. And they were really good about doing things, and we didn't have to beat them or anything. They were willing to do it, and it was fun. Some of them were a little bit lazy, but everybody did things in good spirit, and it was a joy. And I think later on we did some more things like that. We, at many times during the year, we would do what they call lock-ins, and we'd stay up all night trying to keep the boys and the girls apart. And I'll tell you, there were some young men that were all fired up in those days, and one time they climbed a window and went up on the roof and came down and went into where the girls were, and we found them in the window. You got to get out of here. And they kept us busy, and we just didn't want anything going on that was not supposed to be appropriate, and so it was kind of tough in those days. But and then later on we also took them to the San Antonio Zoo, and we went to Six Flags in Houston one time, and then at a different time, or maybe even a couple of years, we had a session at Slumber Falls, which was a lovely place here, and we were able to rent that, and they have cabins and could go in the falls and do stuff, and so we'd stay a week there, and again we would assign the different, or they would sign up first, and then we'd have to assign them later on to different things that they could do to help with the meals and the cleanup and being able to do devotionals and Bible studies and things that we did during the day in between the fun time that we would have. And so later on, as time went on, Ken and I continued that, and they came up with a new way to have our leaders in our church, and they decided that the different adult coordinator and the other coordinators in the church that were part of the adult education and so forth, that they were all to be paid, and they worked half part-time and they were paid. And the days before, everything, the lay leader and the Sunday school superintendent and all were voluntary jobs, but now they wanted to pay. So since my husband and I were doing it together, they asked Kenneth if he would be the youth leader, and he said yes, but he didn't want to be paid. And they said, oh well, if the rest of them are being paid, you have to be paid too. And as it turned out, it was a bad move for us, because Kenneth was at the top of his pay scale when he was getting out, and Colonel in the Air Force made a pretty good amount. And when we took that and he did that for 3 years, that went on into our Social Security account, and it was a low pay, half a pay. And I wish that I had thought about it and said I would put it down that I would be the leader, and we'd let him really lead, but let me be the one that got paid, and we'd have, right now I would have been better off, because I've taken part of his as my I didn't have quite enough. I think I lacked one square or whatever, quarter or whatever on my own, so I took part of Kenneth, so it made a difference in my pay. But anyway, it was a joy to be part of it, and so Kenneth continued to lead the youth and do that. And then it came up that, and we were in the evangelism committee, and we did so many things in that group, and one of the things, Reverend Zirkle only was here by himself. He had no associate at the time, and he was a very, very hands-on, kind, loving, a real pastor and minister all the way in every aspect of that position. But he lacked time to be able to do everything. So he asked us if some of us on that committee, and we'd been trained, would be willing to go out and take communion to the shut-ins and the people, and we said we would. So I got some plastic kits, and I made up, I got the ritual for the communion and had it fixed, typed, and ready. And in there I put in a little jar I'd gotten from one of the baby foods and put the juice in. We had a little thing of crackers in there, and we had it all in little kits, and I still have a couple of the plastic containers that they took, and so I made up the kits, and I was one of them that went around and was fortunate enough to do that. It was a blessed job. And so years later, when people kept saying, oh, you can't do that, it's only licensed physicians can go out and do communion. So anyway, we did it in the early days, and there were blessings galore that went around. Another thing that Ken and I were interested in it and were helping to do, and that was to take patients into San Antonio for cancer treatments. There was a lady in the church, and her name was Dorothy Wimberly, and she got the names of the people that were having cancer problems, and she would assemble them, and then she would call different people to drive them into San Antonio, because that was the only way they could get treatments in those days. So Ken and I decided we had a lovely minivan, that had just come out, and we figured we could take several people. So we'd take 4 or 5 of them into the cancer center in close to the Methodist Hospital there, and we would call them and make arrangements and go by and pick them up, and we'd take them in. They'd have their treatments, and before they got home, we would stop and have lunch. And some of them were tending to be a little bit sick at their stomach and not feeling well, but the meal kind of helped them to settle down a little bit, and we would come and bring them back. And we did that for quite a few years until finally they were able to have it done down here at the hospital that was there close to Randolph, and they were able to. It was a shorter trip at that time to take them there. Let me think. Let me look here and see some other aspects.
You're telling things I didn't know, Marian, so I'm pleased.
Okay. Let's see. Try to see some other things. And then Ken and I were one of the and the Dunnups. No, it wasn't the Dunnups. The Dunnups were in our Sunday school class, and we were in the Wesley class at that time, and we had so many people after a while that we decided we were going to have to break up the 2 Sunday school classes, and the Dunnups were in it, and Life Estes. There were so many, I'll try to think of all of them. But anyway, and then finally, when we broke up, the Bremages had come into the church. They came in and joined at the same time that Ken and I did, and that was in, I think it was January of 78. Ken and I came to New Braunfels. We had our house built, and it was ready when we came, and it was in October of 77, and we visited around, and we had been in a charismatic group in North Dakota where we were, and so we were kind of born-again Christians, and we were kind of rowdy at that time. We liked to raise our hands and say hallelujah and glory and all those things that we enjoyed, and we Freedom Fellowship, and then the very beginning of the Tree of Life, we were involved in all that. But then we talked it over, and we decided we had to be Methodist. We couldn't we didn't want to go anywhere else, so we joined the Methodist Church, and sometimes along the way, at different times, I would say, "Glory, hallelujah," and I would shout out a little bit, and some of the people weren't too happy with that, and they came to me and told me that I need to go in my closet at home and do those things. And I said, well, look, I said, I feel like, you know, if that's, I said, if I can't do that, you're not letting me have a freedom in the church. I feel like I should have that freedom to do that. And I think Reverend Circle got some hits from people that didn't think that was too cool. So anyway, over the years, I've continued to do that, and I call myself a rowdy Methodist. So anyway, that's just another thing. But trying to think of some other things.
You said you remember Reverend Circle saying, you know what a blessing it is for a preacher to go to a church where they'll say hallelujah. I can get really wound up.
He said that. He went to a couple of the black churches and preached, and he said, boy, he said when they started doing that, he said, I was like a dog, they say, go, and I went. You know, he didn't have to tell me to go. It just spurred me on. So I guess it wasn't pleased, but he had to pacify some of the people that were kind of straight-laced, you know. And then we were privileged to be part of Margaret and Brazel and her group, and were able to sponsor a young man in the group, and continued on through the years, and were able to even drive to River Gardens and pick up people and go back and forth. And after Kenneth died, I was able to continue to do that, and I was privileged. And I remember at one time that I've forgotten.
Troy.
Yes, Roy was our sponsor. But then I was trying to think who it was. Let me think if I've got my notes here. Anyway, he was one of the youth directors here, and he had been a policeman at one time. I can't come up with his name. Mm-hmm. And Patten, yeah. And he decided that we needed to have a driving course record. We had to go and take that driving course. And since he'd been a policeman, he had a chance to get the facilities at San Marcos. And so we different ones signed up, and I signed up in the first class. And Cindy Myers was in it. I've forgotten who all there were. There were about 5 or 6 of us in the first group. And of course I was the oldest gal in there. And I tell you, he put us through the paces. I mean, it was a scary thing, because we had these cones around, and you had to drive that car around those cones, and you weren't to knock over the cones. And then another time, he had a thing out there, and you had to ram the car and go as fast as you could and stop on the dime. As scary as it could be, that you weren't going to.
And it wasn't the car, it was that van, and it was bigger.
It was the van, yeah, the van, and then we had to park it, you know, parallel park it and all this stuff. And I'm telling you, it was hair-raising, but the old gal was able to make it through some way or another. And so I continued to drive. And then later on, the church's insurance was saying, no, you can't have these older people drive anymore. They were going to cut us off, you know. And we were over the age limit at the insurance, when they were trying to push that back and say, no, these are the drivers that would volunteer to go and do this, and not everybody would do it. So I revised. And I never did say back before, when we split classes in the Wesley class, the other that went in the Brimmages were part of starting that class, and they called it the Revised Version because that's when the Revised Version Bible came out, so they just thought that would be a nice name. So they named it. So we had two, and over the years, the Wesley class, different people moved away and that went down, and so finally there's just a few of us, so the Wesleys moved over into the Revised Version class, and that's what we have today, the Revised Version. I've often wanted to say, let's go back and make it the Wesley class again. It just seemed closer some way than the Revised Version. But anyway, it's a lot of real kind, dedicated people. I've been privileged to not only be in the evangelism, but we've had so many wonderful missionaries that have come through, and we've been able to sponsor those and have them, and we've been part of it, and been a blessing. And then Ken and I were on the Pastor-Parish Relations Committee early as we were here, and then as progress came, we bought a video camera, and they were big in those days, and we had a huge big camera that we battery that we put over our shoulder to be able to have enough battery. And so we would video a lot. I don't know if the videos are around here, but we gave the church, I think, all the videos that we had. And
we should look for.
And I might have one or two at home that I could glean out, but I was thinking we gave them, and that we would do all kinds of things around the church. You know, we'd have a special ceremony or something out in the open area around with the churches and off of our playground area in the church here, and we'd video things when we'd move tables out there to have some dinner or something going on out there, and we'd video those. And then we after Kenneth died, I was asked if I'd go with one of the men that was on the archive committee, not the archives, the Pastor Parish, and I went and videoed all of the furniture in the parsonage, and they would have a record of all the furniture that was in the parsonage. And he didn't want me to narrate, so he narrated it, and I did the videotaping. But it was an interesting time. I was privileged in the first group that went into Stephen Ministry, and was able to be in that, and was privileged and is still working. I'm still able to hobble along and visit people in the hospital, and what a blessing that is.
Was Bob Tatum your first coordinator?
Yeah, he was the he and Carla were the ones that that did the farming of the Stephen Ministry program, and I'm trying to think, the pastor was Fred Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if I turned in some pictures that I found that my friend had taken, and we were lined up at the altar, and I think Fred Martin had his hand on my head, and so did Reverend Bob Tatum. So I'm going to turn those in. That'll go down in history. Anyway.
I do have them. I'm trying to get everybody identified.
Okay. Oh, and let me have my thing about, I want you to know about my sweet little daughter, Pamela. And she was such a sweet little born-again Christian. She loved the Lord and was such a good worker with the youth when we were in the military. And we were up in Minot, North Dakota, and she joined us there. She had stayed a while on in Alabama when we moved up to there, but when Elaine came, her older sister, and then she came, they became part of our youth group. And I was singing in the choir, and I had a young lady there that her name was Janet Parker, was such a fine young lady, and I told her that my daughters would be coming from Alabama, and that I wanted her to know them, and and she could work with them to get them into the group. And as we landed in North Dakota in the military at Minot Air Force Base. At that time, that was the we were the on the they called us the we were on the northern tier to defend against invasion by the Russians, because the Russians could come over the ice cap over through from Canada down into. So we were in the Air Force, and part of our and we were in the bomb section, and my neighbor was in the missile silos, and they had missile silos, and that was to protect our country. The first line of defense, the northern tier, is what we were. And so our two daughters came, and they got and the chaplains asked us when we came, since you've had experience with youth, would you help us with the youth? And Ken and I said, well, yes, you know, by that time here we're getting a little older, but we said yes, we would. Well, it turned out that we actually had about, and this sounds big, but it was about 63 young people from all areas of the working in the military there at the base. Some of them were in supply, some of them were APs, and some of them were all different levels. And there were a lot of young ladies as well as young men in that group. And of course we had our two daughters, and they were there and part of that group. And so we would have them, and they all that group were spirit filled, and they were a real joy. And of course all those 63 never came at one time, because they were all in silos and working and so forth. But we had a deal that every month we would have a birthday party for whoever's birthday was that month, and they would come to our quarters, and our quarters were there on the base in Colonel's quarters, and we'd have them come, and they would come and sit down on the floor with their guitars, and we'd sing praise songs, and we'd have Bible study. I mean, not Bible study, we'd just have prayer and praise there. And then later on we'd go in the basement. We had a ping pong table and a dartboard down in the basement, and we had a TV down there, and it was a fun time. And our daughters got so carried away that they started wanting to make cookies. So they'd make cookies, and they'd make them this big, and the guys called them flying saucers. And they thought that was really great. And so anyway, our daughter was among the group, and they did all kinds of things. They went to the different churches in the summers, and they helped them with Bibles, with their vacation Bible schools. They all did all kinds of other things at different times. And one of the young man that had a farm had a stroke, and so they went out and painted his barn. And they did all kinds of real sweet, lovely things like that. And so at one time, Ken and I were not able to go to, and I didn't say, but they also had a Bible study in the chapel on, I've forgotten, Tuesday or Wednesday. Tuesday in the chapel and Wednesday at our quarters, or the other way around. We had back-to-back days. And so we were studying, I'm trying to think, that one Bible study that, the Navigator's Bible study. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but it's a real special Bible study that it's personal, and it went along with our group, and we studied that. And So one evening, Ken and I were not able to go to the meeting, so the two girls had decided they would babysit for one of the young colonels, and his wife needed to have some time off, and he was a squadron commander, and so they asked if our two girls would look after their two sons that were in middle school, and they said yeah, they thought they could do that. So the youngest one of ours was Pamela here, and she was working as in the credit union. She was a clerk in the credit union, and she worked during the day. And Elaine, my daughter, was the oldest. Our oldest daughter was in Minot State, going to college, taking courses. So they figured they could trade off and do it, and they did. And this one evening, we weren't able to go to the Bible study, so they were at the Bible study, and so the group wanted to go into Minot and get some ice cream, and it was about 20 miles. We were about 20 miles from the Canadian border where Minot was, and we would go down to Bismarck, which is the capital, and then Minot was the Air Force Base. And anyway, we were they were going into that, and so Elaine decided she would go babysit, and Pamela went with the other group to on into Minot to get ice cream, and so they did. And on the way back toward the base, a drunk driver on the wrong side of the divided interstate came barreling, and so our youth leader was driving, and there were 3 cars. A lot of our young people worked in the VA hospital in Minot. They would go from our base to the hospital and work, and they were on the way, and they saw this drunk driver come out from the inn there where he'd been drinking, and he was tearing down, and they were flashing their lights and honking their horns, trying to get attention to the people coming out of Minot. And so the first 2 cars peeled off, and our car was right there, and it hit head on. And so the chaplains came and knocked on our door, and Kenneth went down, and so the one young lady I told you about, Janet Parker, that came and helped our girls get into it. She was in the front seat, and my daughter was in the front seat, Pamela, and so they were all killed immediately, and they came to tell us. And so the big headlines in the paper at that time said, oh yeah, it was that group from the chapel, from the Air Force Base, and they probably were drinking and all. And everybody knew they weren't drinking, because they were the ones that got up at 7 o'clock, 7:30, or 7 or 7:30 on Saturday mornings and had prayer and praise service. So all the base people knew it was a Christian group that had gotten killed. But anyway, Pam was our sweet gal, and we did cry a little bit, but we figured that we would do a little bit more in our life in Christian service to make up for what she couldn't do. And so we've dedicated our lives to the Lord, and I'm privileged to be here and speaking to you, and the Lord has been good to me to let me go on for a lot of years. So since Easter Sunday was my birthday and I turned 91, I tell everybody I'm 19. That's it. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Marian.